To discover the Royal Greenhouses of Laeken is to plunge into a universe of 15,000 square meters of greenery, but also of architecture. It's a veritable work of art that we owe to Leopold II and to his great love for flowers, gardens, buildings, and structures. A true fan of nature, King Leopold II dreamed of combining an ambitious architectural project with the best botanical techniques of his time. The greenhouses were erected in the 19th century and are still today considered to be among the most beautiful in the world. From the very first glimmer of spring, every year the same ritual is repeated. In accordance with the wishes of Leopold II, the gates of the royal domain are opened wide, and the pathways are silently flooded with daily visitors. Each time the greenhouses are open to the public, the same miracle occurs. The flowers are all in bloom. They reveal themselves at their Sunday best, as if they knew they were going to be admired by thousands of astonished glances. The visit begins with the Orangery, the oldest part of the greenhouses. Built in 1817, the Orangery is notable for its 26 Tuscan columns concealed behind bay laurels, orange trees, and rhododendrons. Here the majority of the fruit trees are older than the visitors. Some of them are already more than 200 years old, which makes this collection of orange trees one of the world's most prestigious. Thanks to the bright green of the Canary Island date palms and the dark pink of the rhododendrons, visitors are instantly transported into a natural world of savory perfumes. From stone to glass in a few small steps. Welcome to the Winter Garden, a true architectural masterpiece. This cupola appears to have been embroidered in metal. At the top, which peaks at over 25 meters, a magnificent crown which seems to reign over this vast domain, featuring the royal greenhouses designed by the architect Alphonse Balla. Only a few meters away from this glass giant is another, more discreet greenhouse, the Theatre Greenhouse, which is the actual junction between the Orangery and the castle. This greenhouse was entirely rebuilt at the end of the 20th century. To keep the grounds in such an impeccable state, 15 gardeners dedicate their talents and knowledge year-round. Each plant is meticulously planted in a particular spot, each flower having benefited from the necessary attention to ensure its blossoming in spring, a skillful harmony of vegetation where absolutely nothing is left to chance. Here, several thousand trees and shrubs live side by side, regardless of their origin, their family, or even their history. For over time, each one of them has found its place and now flourishes, perfectly melding with the forms of the buildings that house them. And as for the more ephemeral plants, each year, just after winter, the domain's network of pathways bustles with activity as a host of gardeners search for just the right place to display each burst of floral color, each species of plant. Like the hydrangeas that seem to be born here, just between these two columns, proudly enthroned and decked out in their best colors, the hydrangeas set a stunning contrast with the multiple greens of their neighbors, the palms and banana trees. A few rays of light, and in an instant an exotic universe reveals itself to us. Visitors will be transported by this mix of floral colors, textures, and odors from exotic and far-off lands. Because here in the greenhouses, travel is the common thread. These sand lilies come to us from South Africa, while this Cycas revoluta, also known as the sago palm, comes from Japan. The indirect rays of sun highlight the contrasts between the mauve and yellow of these salpiglossis, the reds of these slipper flowers, and the pastel tones of these angels' trumpets, a flower whose care requires special precautions as it is known above all for its toxicity. Not far from the winter garden, a more intimate greenhouse will beckon. It was fully renovated in 2001, and what it houses has already attracted some of the greatest foreign botanists. The Maquet Greenhouse shelters a unique collection, some 300 shrubs of the Camellia genus. King Leopold II was passionately devoted to these flowers, which come from Asia, so much so that he wanted to create the largest collection in Europe. That wish was not only achieved, but even amplified, because today the Camellia collection of Laeken is the largest such greenhouse collection in the world, an achievement of which Belgium may be rightly proud. Less colorful, yet just as astonishing, tucked away in the linking galleries of the winter garden, the man ferns, impressive both for their hairiness as well as their large size. As the seasons progress, this exotic plant will extend its foliage up to 4 meters in length. Next to the dome of the winter garden, another cupola topped with a star came into being at the end of the 19th century. The star is the symbol of the Congo, of which King Leopold II had become the sovereign 1 year prior. The Congo Greenhouse shelters numerous subtropical plants and majestic palms which seem to want to touch the sky. In this greenhouse, visitors will discover fan palms, Canary Islands dragon trees, and Chinese fountain palms. Just as when visiting a big city, here one must look up, as the sights are all up above, as seen with this thatch palm which offers us its fruit. Orchids have taken up residence in the 4 corners of the domain. It has to be said, nonetheless, that they particularly appreciate this environment, which offers them constant exposure to a soft light. To be truly at their best, orchids need constant humidity in the air. In this luxurious environment, many other species of vegetation also flourish, such as these myrtle leaf milkwort. The common calla knows how to attract attention with its brilliant white blossoms and glistening leaves. The curious are always rewarded here, as surprises lurk in certain locales, such as this spiral of yellow narcissus, the flower symbolizing the month of April. Between the trees and other plants, visitors will also discover Chinese statues and vases, souvenirs from a voyage that King Leopold II made to the Far East. This part of the Embarcadère Greenhouse was used as a cloakroom when King Leopold II received guests. It's a special space invested with history, over which still today the statue christened Dawn by Charles van der Stappen still keeps a watchful eye. By means of a mirror effect, Dawn seems to communicate with another statue that is practically identical, a work entitled Evening. Their placement at the 2 extremities of the greenhouse thus takes on a very full meaning. During the era of King Leopold II, the most distinguished guests pulled up in their horse-drawn carriages right here at the esplanade of the Embarcadère. When entering via the Embarcadère, visitors will admire this David in bronze, a perfect copy of a statue dating from the 15th century by the celebrated sculptor Donatello, the original of which remains in Florence. Through the window panes, we notice the Japanese tower commissioned by Leopold II. It is a replica of a tower built for the World's Fair in 1900. The visit will extend beyond the greenhouses, allowing spectators to admire a view overlooking Brussels that is unobstructed and amazing. Enjoy the occasion to stroll in a park that has had the time to awaken from winter's chill, just in time to show off its most beautiful spring finery. Your stroll will also give you the opportunity to admire this Juneberry tree, whose fine blossom-covered branches float delicately in the breeze. Here we discover the Iron Church at the highest point of the royal domain, a site that remained exclusively religious until 1902. In this 200-hectare royal domain of Laeken, each plant is allowed to blossom in the fullness of time, as the changes in climate dictate. When strolling through this vast property, time seems to have another dimension, another rhythm. We take a royal pause, time for discovery, far, far away from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. Sometimes it's the entrancing scents that entice visitors to explore in certain greenhouses. The Grand Gallery positively invites us to meander in this way and to relax, as the color green is first and foremost the color of tranquility. A few minutes later, visitors will literally be plunged into a forest of fuchsias, one of the most unique attractions of the greenhouses. The hanging leaves and flowers seem to want to reach out and touch the pink hydrangea along the pathway. It's a true communion between two flower species that you'll discover in the Subterranean Gallery, illuminated via a glass roof and featuring walls entirely covered with vegetation. It's the ideal spot to discover the staghorn or elkhorn ferns, a tropical plant which, like the Vricea and the tufted air plant, especially appreciate warm and humid environments. The crane flower invites us to dream, just like its astonishing neighbor, the ern plant. It is certainly here in the galleries that the shadow zones are the most extensive. A more intimate visit is possible here before discovering a shaft of light in the temple of the fuchsia in all its forms and all its colors. Its neighbor doesn't require a lot of attention. Maintenance for hydrangeas is not complicated. Maintenance for hydrangeas is not complicated. These plants, which for the most part come from Asian origins, are nonetheless widespread in gardens throughout our country. The more acid the soil, the more the hydrangea blossoms will become blue. It's a secret known to all devoted gardeners. But to attain this sky blue color, two other essential conditions must be met: aluminium oxide and, of course, flowers that can turn blue. All year long, each plant must be watered, trimmed, and otherwise looked after, a level of care that only botanical experts can accomplish to ensure the safekeeping of all these species, some of which are the unique specimens in Belgium. The principal feature of the Grand Gallery is that it perfectly mirrors the geological features of the ground. The stairs thus take up the long straight lines, a glass corridor 200 meters long that links the winter garden to the Palm Plateau. A long pathway bordered by surprises, the most impressive undoubtedly being the Gallery of the Geraniums. Built in 1890, this long, narrow greenhouse remains almost entirely in its original state. If its color palette is highly varied, the geranium is recognizable by its 5 petals. This plant is very popular in Belgium and flourishes only when the soil is not too humid. Thus regular watering is important, but never to excess. As for the fuchsias, it's the bell-like blossoms that attract attention. This bush-like shrub hails from Central and South America. Some varieties of fuchsia cannot withstand frost. That's why it's only after winter that these blossoms will astound all those gazes fixed heavenward. The long pathway adorned with fuchsias and geraniums brings us eventually to the greenhouse of Diana. This greenhouse gets its name from the famous goddess of the hunt, a statue of whom seems to survey the spot, so abundantly decorated with arborescent ferns. In this temple of vegetation, all 5 of your senses will be called into play, as multiple odors and the sound of rustling waters will guide visitors' steps. A strange flower in the shape of a grape cluster will catch your attention. Perched at the end of its branches, the flowers of this showy medinilla sometimes reach 40 centimeters in length. Like its neighbors, the orchids, they also greatly appreciate a humid environment. Between flowers and ferns, a discreet waterfall in daylight, absolute harmony reigns here, the secret of which only the gardeners know. As soon as the greenhouse doors open, a breeze rushes down the length of the long corridors, a gentle and healthy breath of fresh air whenever the weather outside permits. Not all of the domain's greenhouses were constructed at the same time, and one of them, prior to its restoration in 2005, was most remarkable for its architecture. The Azalea Greenhouse was formed from a structure of metal and wood. It's a greenhouse that houses over 100 azaleas, flowering bushes that come in numerous colors. Originally from oceanic and continental origins, these plants prefer a slightly shady environment over a spot where the sunlight is too pronounced. The secret to abundant blossoming? Patience. As every year, it is necessary to remove each faded flower in order to ensure their continued existence. This is undoubtedly the greenhouse with the strangest forms, located at the end of the park. Welcome to the Palm Greenhouse, a majestic and unique building. Here we enter the temple of rubber trees, palm trees, banana trees, and tropical ferns, like this bird's nest fern. Here all of the species originating from subtropical regions find conditions favorable to their growth and development, as well as their fruit production. As for the thatch palms, they seem to want to commune with the windows perched on top of the palm greenhouse. Behind the plants, the experienced eye will recognize in the arches of the greenhouse forms inspired by Art Nouveau. Here the structure is at the service of the plant collections. The architecture thus becomes the supreme jewel in the crown of the vegetable kingdom. For more than 200 years, the seasons have passed over what is now known as the Royal Domain of Laeken. And for more than 100 years, the autumn leaves have danced around the royal greenhouses, the first rays of sun flooding this wonderful park, dominated by the bright red of the Japanese tower. Years of life written in the soil and in certain tree roots, witnesses to the history of our capital, our monarchy, and our country. Under the shelter and in the calm of the greenhouses, the exotic plants and rare collections will pass in total quiet even the rudest of winters. The greenhouses of Laeken, this fabulous royal treasure, will gently awaken again at the end of winter, when the first rays of sun start to warm the still sleeping panes of glass, so as to offer, several weeks later, this beautiful spectacle to the enduring amazement of all who come to witness it.